Anybody? Anybody? Hi, welcome to the show. Let's see. Walter's here. BurnEye. Hi. And then there should be also Exotic. There, we did it. Okay. So this is amazing that we got this together. AlienScientist is here. Walter Bosley, The Secrets of Nimsa. BurnEye from Crypto Alchemist and Exotic Propulsion, Jeremiah. How are you all doing tonight?
Great.
I'm excited.
Good.
Thank you,
Walter.
You
know what that intro needs? Mastodons. I think they're about to bring those back from the
dead. Five Finger Death Punch. I can't remember the other bands I saw. It was with the big show a few years back. Mastodon is the only one that I'm pretty sure blasted my eardrums out.
Wow, yeah.
we had the seats that were like close to the stage in the front area, and boy, that was the one group that I should have had earplugs in.
I always have earplugs, and people stare at me like I'm this like pretentious jerk, and I can still hear them behind my back snickering. So that's fine, as long as I get that. But
yeah.
So for anyone who doesn't know Walter's long-standing one of the greatest researchers also in the field of ufology. I mean, you've also gotten further into it, deeper back than almost anybody. No one bothers to go beyond the 50s. You're going back to the 1850s, the 1750s. You're looking into Nimsa. Maybe you want to introduce a bit more about your research and what you do.
Well, basically, I just started, pulling some threads, logical threads, and I found where there is a thread connecting the mysterious 1850s Sonora Aero Club with the legend of the bell during the Nazi Germany era. And in a few books, Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora, and Origin, the 19th century emergence of the 20th century breakaway civilizations. And I think a little bit in my book, Shimmering Light, I lay it all out, what I've found. And again, it's the threads I pulled to make those connections are a lot more logical than the lore and stories of crash saucers that were reverse engineered being the answer for the bell. The main thing is between material that Stephen Romano, publisher of the great Delshow book, between the material he gave me and my own research, I found the bell, both visually illustrated and described, in Delshow's material that predates 1923, his death, and he was claiming they were using this in the 1850s. So, the bell doesn't come so much from an alien crash vehicle. It comes from good old development that really started with, and you guys will like this, oh my gosh, I can never get his name right. He's kind of the co-father of the science of thermodynamics, and his name has a Q in it, and he's the one that published in 1849 a turbo, not a turbo. I'll have to look it up, but and I'll think of the name sometime during the show. But it looks like the bell was a development of something, the turbine, the something turbine, published in 1849.
Shock Charles, maybe from 1787.
No. It was 1849. I apologize. I'll have to look it up.
Patent from 1849.
Wow.
Yeah, the something turbine, and it's named after this guy. And I'm telling you, the diagram.
Turbine.
The what?
Turbine or
turbine? Turbine. Tomato. However you guys know how to pronounce it properly.
With the E or without the E?
Seems Tartarian related. If a turbine.
It's with an E. It's a turbine. Anyway, the Mac something. It's with a Q. It's a weird name that for some reason
Willard
I can't remember.
Gibbs is the name that comes up online. Willard Gibbs is apparently what the internet thinks is the founder of thermodynamics.
This
guy is
it kind of looks like a hat anyway.
Anyway, the diagram that I found that was published in 1849 is virtually identical to what Delshow claimed they were using in the 1850s.
So who's Delshow again? Because Delshow had the Sonora Air Club, or what is his background?
Charles Delshow was a German immigrant who was sponsored. His immigration was kind of sponsored by this German-based group called Nimsa, And he, according to his own story, was sent to California to observe and report on the Sonora Aero Club, this group of also German immigrants who were, according to Delschow, developing and successfully test flying, kind of proof of concept, right, prototype stuff, flying machines that were not hot air balloons. They were not dirigibles. They were these devices, as you see on the screen, that used what we would call anti-gravity, whether that's technically exactly correct or not.
But something might mitigate our idea of what this is, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the colors of these, I believe, like in those pictures, actually depict different fields, like positive, negative, and a third force almost. That they're encoding within these.
Yeah, you know what they really remind me of is Louis Roda in 1915, and there's an article on this pretty decent one on Rex Research. He had this other little club that he was building these craft with, and he called it the Aeroballistique. It was a RF powered, steel framed, dirigible shaped type of craft, but it was not a dirigible. I mean, it was actually made of like you consider like rebar, making a framework of rebar, and extremely heavy, you know, big wheels and all that stuff. A couple of air props to move it around, but I guess this thing would levitate on its own. It used principles that are extremely similar to some of the Vril craft and Alexei Cherikov's adaptation with the Graviflyer. Basically, uses the same field distribution. There is a diagram for his device too. It's all solid state, but it uses a differentially charged set of 3 rings, different sizes, and RF power source to pre-ionize. And this thing, apparently, he says, would just sit in the air, lock itself into place, wouldn't be blown around by the wind or anything. It didn't require much power either. And the weight seemed to be almost negligible in the magnetic fields produced around this steel-framed device. So a lot of these things really seem to have quite a bit of similarity in terms of the shape and the technology behind Louis Roda's Aeroballistique craft.
But also, Walter,
I'm going to pop a link in the chat or in the private chat so we can take a quick look.
Yeah, please send a link. I'd like to see that. I was going to
There
say,
we go.
Walter,
Let's pull this up. Take a look at it.
Isn't it interesting also, though, they're saying that this is an epiphany from aliens, right? But then
Right.
You know, you're finding evidence that this was something that was worked on by guys for
Yeah, I have a video on my Walter Bosley channel YouTube that I did, I think, last summer, which is I think it's titled it has to do with the bell, a discussion about the bell, and I have the guy's name right there in his photo, and I show this turbine, and it just figures that I wouldn't have it easy to pull up, but I'm kind of trying to do a quick look. And
here's the Walter Bosley channel. Where would we find it? Secret Mission Burton or
go into videos and where you're at and scroll down. It would be from about last summer, if I'm not mistaken. Don't go too fast. When you get to the one that it's a discussion on the bell.
Just do a search for Bell.
Issues on the Nazi bell? Yes, was the Glocker
Awesome.
real issues, and it's in there. And just scroll through till you get to the turbine issue. Turbine, sorry. Okay, yeah, somewhere along there, you're gonna. Right back. Go back.
Coming. There you go.
McCorn Ranking, the Ranking turbine. Thank you. There it is. I'm not crazy, you guys. I'm not making this up like some of my snarky troll critics like to say. William Ranking.
No, yeah, make sure to look it up. That's awesome.
I have a photo.
That threw me off. The Q threw me off. If it was
in
engine guy, I would have been like, Kelvin, Rankin.
In my video, I show the diagram that he published. Like right after his picture, it should be. Right there. There you go. And that, if you look at Delschau's illustrated turbine that the Sonora Aero Club used, it's virtually identical. It's virtually identical.
Let's see if I can find the turbine picture.
Oh, it's in my video too. If you just let it play out, you'll see. I go ahead and this video, I would think more people. Yeah, there it is. See What you've got is, see the thing with the teeth in it? That's that right there. And then here's the reservoir. There's that right there. And then all the stuff that it goes through is essentially that process there.
So this is interesting because we're finding further and further back examples of this technology.
Yeah, this is human technology.
Said like that the Nazis had got it from Victor Schauberger back in like the 20s.
Schauberger was in the mix, but here's the thing: you've got the mysterious Nimsa, which Delchau says all this crap about the New York Motor Zephyr Association and all this New York this, New York that. Nimsa was not a New York-based organization. Delchau says it was headquartered, based in Germany. And so you've got, think about it. Gee, where did the Nazi German bell development come from? Golly, I wonder where. Could it be the Germans who were applying that to their flying machines and such?
If you don't mind me asking, what's the history of Nimsa? I mean, how far back do they actually go?
Hey, our only source for Nimsa, here's the problem with it, is Charles Delchau. Nimsa has never appeared anywhere that anyone's ever presented before or since, except in the writings of guys like me and others who have Dennis Crenshaw and Tim Swartz and all the other writers in our times that have been writing about the Sonora Aero Club. Nimsa is our original source is Delchau. Now, I've done a lot of analyses and a lot of hypothesizing on it, and I try to do it in an educated way. But honestly, I'm always honest with it. That's our source, Charles Delchau.
Have you found anything in South America or any of the other German colonies that's similar to the Nimsa or Sonora Air Club?
Here's the thing. Delchau himself said that any of the groups that did this kind of thing back then were all under the aegis of Nimsa. Now, what I have found, when you look at the history of Germany's presence in South America, it goes back to the very last few years of the 18th century, primarily into the 19th century. They were very much colonizing and being involved with mining. Now, if you recall, the Kaiser, when the Prussian states unified, there were 48 of them. When they unified into what we know as the nation of Germany, and of course they went on the gold standard, well, that's one of the big reasons why they were in South America was looking for the gold. All the.
It's
gold
interesting because of the gold standard. We don't think about it, but if anyone had gold, they could call your economy, so they could buy you out if you had tons of gold, right? So the gold standard is great, but also horrible.
Yeah, and exactly. Here's the thing: you're dealing with. You got to know about some of the murkier parts of the German unification history. There were the nationalists who were behind the push of unifying all the Prussian states into a single Germany. Okay,
because there wasn't a Germany at that point, right?
That's right. It was their vision. Now you can trace what we in modern times call, the Prussian nationalists. You can trace them back to the medieval Junkers. Okay, and the medieval Junkers, this class of merchants, kind of the first corporate villains, really. What they started doing around the Prussian states was going in and through duplicitous activities, taking the lesson right out of Machiavelli's Prince, right? They would go in and they would ingratiate themselves with a target culture or state. Okay, and they would build that state up, and then they would start ingratiating themselves with that state's enemy. Okay, and then they would cause a conflict between the two. Their claws would sink deeper into the original state while they were helping the enemy state overcome them. And then once that original host state was, destroyed, they would jump ship to the adversary and then do the same thing. And they did that from medieval era on up to the unification of the mid-19th century. And then where it really gets scary for us is, thanks to Halmer Schacht, beginning, I think, in the Between Wars era, Nazi Germany started doing the same thing. And that's why I argue the United States was unfortunately successfully invaded and taken over by this Junker / Prussian nationalist / fascist Nazi culture organization through Operation Paperclip. In other words, they did the classic thing that I just described, but they did it to the United States, right? Germany was going to lose the war. Their home nation was going to lose the war. So they saw an opportunity to get their clutches into us through Operation Paperclip, building our military industrial complex, and they've done the same exact thing. that the medieval Junkers were doing. They've done it to us. They were doing this in South America, too. It was, the idea was to transport your industry to a foreign land and then take over that foreign land by what you bring to them. And that's the exact model of operation of our military-industrial complex.
Right, and for Americans who haven't figured out what Operation Paperclip is, right, that they took Nazi scientists, put paperclips on the documents so they could bring them here, and Walt Disney made the Werner von Braun video.
It was also like espionage and like Secret Service people and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. But you know what was primarily driving Operation Paperclip? People think it was the rockets and the bomb. No. When you look at the history of Operation Paperclip, which is included in that book you just showed the title of, aviation medicine scientists were behind Operation Paperclip. Ours wanted the Luftwaffes because all these guys, Colonel Harry Armstrong, Otis Benson, all these American aviation medical scientists, they knew all the German aviation medical scientists dating back to the 1920s. And this was the generation who, dating back to the 20s, they had always dreamed of putting man in space. Okay, so our aviation medicine scientists at the end of the war said we need to keep pursuing this goal of putting man in space. So it was dreamed up by those guys, and they're the ones who came up with it. And the primary motive was to get the aviation medicine scientists. Why? Right? Life support, putting man in space. A lot of people think that the goal was, well, we want high-altitude bombers, and that was why they... No. High-altitude bombers, okay, being able to build high-altitude bombers and put crews on those, that always was, and there, Hubertus Strughold, there you go, there's a main one. That was always a goal, okay, in the desire, the drive to put man in space. You have Otis Benson, who was, kind of one of the right-hand men of Colonel Harry Armstrong, making all this happen. What does he become? He becomes commander of the Aerospace Medicine Division of the United States Air Force in the 1950s. During the 1950s, the U.S. Air Force is developing manned spaceflight, and they're the ones who originally have Mercury. They developed the capsule and all of that. They developed the life support system, the pressure suits, the whole thing. And then it's all handed to NASA in October of 1958 when NASA stood up. And we're told, it was just all civilian and public after that. So everything about Operation Paperclip originated with the pursuit of going into outer space. Now, think about that within context of what I'm telling you.
Right.
This ties into anti-gravity research in the mid-19th century.
And the 16th century. That's what's getting crazier when you see that there's something that, so at the same time, 16th, 17th, 18th century, that you're people still obsessed with magic, right? And they're talking about magic realms in space. And space contact is starting to emerge as the next realization of that idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was all tied to the space race. And von Braun was brought in because rockets will give us missile weapons, but also will launch us into space under the rocket model of things. And of course, the whatever bomb scientists we got, that was for obvious reasons too. But
do you know if Walter, do you know if Jack Parsons had any in contact with the Sonora Air Club, or if that they're connected at all?
Well, remember, the Sonora Air Club, we are told by Delschow, disbanded in the not long after he began his contact with them, because, according to Delschow, Nimsa sent from Germany an individual that he only identified as that Prussian officer. The German members of the club living in California hated this guy. This guy came from Germany and said, the organization loves your progress, but we want you to make these for use in war. And the Sonora Aero Club Germans said, no, we're not developing this for war machines. And there was a bit of tension. And then Delschow tells us not long after that, Peter Menace, the leader of the Sonora Aero Club, dies tragically in a fiery explosion while testing one of his flying machines. Now,
interesting.
Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But shortly after that, that pretty much the club fell apart, disbanded. But we interestingly have a guy named Solomon Andrews, who in 1863 or 4 had been contacting President Lincoln saying, I have this flying machine. Lincoln responded, invited him to D.C., told Edwin Stanton, his Secretary of War, to have his representatives observe a demonstration of the Solomon Andrews craft. And the newspapers at the time reported it, and there were reporters and other witnesses of this controlled flight thing, okay? And this was, of course, in the decade after the Sonora Aero Club, so I've often wondered, and I've been looking, haven't found it yet, for a direct contact connection between Solomon Andrews and the Sonora Aero Club. But remember, Delshow tells us there were other groups around the United States who were also developing flying machines under the aegis of NIMSA at the time of the Sonora Aero Club. So Solomon Andrews, in my opinion, has some connection. Of course, in one of my books, Secret Missions 3, Destination Carcosa, I lay out what I think might have been America's first black project, in that history tells us Solomon Andrews was told, no, we're in the middle of a war, blah, blah, blah. What I propose is that by the war's end, maybe the United States had decided to secretly develop Solomon Andrews technology, because when you look at the technology as described by Delshow with the Sonora Aero Club in the 1850s, when you look at what Solomon Andrews demonstrated, and then 30 years later, after Solomon Andrews, you have the 1890s airship mystery, and boy, oh boy, does it interestingly have some of the same technology as Delshow described was going on in the 1850s. And the big smoking gun is a guy named Colonel Samuel Tillman, is in the 1890s. He allegedly identifies himself to one of the airship witnesses. Samuel Tillman, he was a U.S. Army officer. He was a scientist, okay? He studied thermodynamics, chemistry, all the kind of stuff that, for obvious reasons, an airship would be interesting, particularly an alchemical airship. And this guy is allegedly one of the airship pilots witnessed in the late 1890s. And here's what I argue. I argue that the 1890s mystery airships were very possibly I'm very confident in saying that they are the second generation of what the Sonora Aero Club and Solomon Andrews were doing. I go further by saying I think what they were was a secret U.S. Army project.
Wow. And it's interesting because we did a study on the Civil War, the Confederacy. Sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to point out that this would imply that they had secret chemistry knowledge, because like mercury, the superconductivity and the supercooling and that kind of stuff wasn't really invented until like turn of the century, 1911. As
well, there were in the 16th.
We are told.
The 16th, 17th century, you had novelty gas exploration, so lots of people were discovering novelty gases.
Do you think it was plasma?
Yeah, they were super cool and other stuff. What was liquid
hydrogen style, or what type of?
It is okay. So Bernie, it was a plasmatic effect, and the reason why it's plasma. Anytime you use mercury in a low pressure environment, you're going to end up with plasma, regardless. Even in atmospheric conditions, you end up with plasma. It's just so surface bound. And right at that point between where the liquid mercury hits the atmosphere or other medium, there's still plasma there. It's just generally really constrained. But in a vacuum environment, you get to see it. I got it on Jeremy's show. I mentioned this idea of producing light with mercury stirring around in a low-pressure vessel, but it turns out it's actually called barometric light. I didn't remember the term. And so I posted in the private chat a link to barometric light on Wiki. And we can take a look at this very old phenomena going all the way back to 1675. First possibility of electric lighting. And so what they would do is they'd build a barometer out of mercury, and when they would tip it upside down, making sure that the mercury didn't escape during the tip, it would start to try to fall down because mercury is very heavy and it would pull a vacuum in the closed vessel, and as it bounced around back and forth, it would produce this light. And if it was agitated after it stabilized, it would produce a light in a totally dark room. And this tells us mercury is naturally ionic, and that it's releasing both mercury vapor, even in a vacuum vessel with no heating, and it's producing plenty of voltage for ionization of nitrogen gas molecules, producing the characteristic blue and purple glow of mercury in low-pressure environments. So anytime you move mercury, It can accelerate mercury if you push it through a tube with a pump. If you turn it into a vapor and phase transition it back into a liquid again, you're going to get huge plasmatic ionic effects. And all you need to do to direct those effects is one of two things. You can follow T.T. Brown's mechanism using magnets to flow the mercury vapor through a condenser, and during its vaporous state, the natural mercury ions can be collected as electric power. T.T. Brown invented an electric power generator using mercury, and it looks identical in shape and construction to the old mercury boilers that we see in Vaimanika Shastra. And the second use is we can use electric fields to redirect mercury ions. And in that case, we can gain acceleration out of those mercury ions and actually get something called a geometrically amplified field, or get the relativistic momentum out of accelerated mercury charged particles, which do not have a symmetric acceleration curve because they're not symmetrically charged.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned Brown. I just want to throw in here that since I revealed Colonel Samuel Tillman's role in this, you know, airship mystery stuff, and what I think, I mean, he's in the data there. He's in the reports and stuff. But since I've talked about him and presented him in connection with this, you know, stuff that I write about, Daniel List has done an excellent series, which in the same series that he talks about T. Townsend Brown, he talks about Colonel Samuel Tillman and reveals a lot more than even I knew about Tillman. And here's their connection. They were both in that group called the Cosmos Club. And so check out Dark Journalist's report on the activities of Colonel Tillman and the Cosmos Club and stuff. That's the same guy that I'm talking about in my books.
What I find interesting is that just simply the acceleration of a medium that is non-uniformly charged, you could use even water, has been successfully proven to create a force in a completely enclosed vessel using non-symmetrical acceleration, and basically producing what we consider a kinetic drive that does not exhaust a propellant whatsoever. And so there are many mechanisms by which we can use a fluid or some kind of fluid medium to produce a force, but the best of which we can use a liquid medium that can phase transition into a gas at just that right energy level and really get some seriously unsymmetrical accelerations out of it and produce a very linear or directional force using the acceleration of that vapor. And so mercury is a perfect candidate because it's extremely heavy and it ionizes easy.
And when you combine that, the mercury vortex stuff, with what Schauberger had developed, which
exactly,
you know.
Yeah, then you have the system for both acceleration on how you're going to accelerate this mercury vapor and recapture it, and you have the mechanism for, based on the old Vaimanika Shastra stuff, the monodiagrams and that whole study of accelerated liquids. We have those two together, and we have the pump.
Is
and
that
we
the
have
honeypoo then, when you're essentially adding those two together?
Is it what?
That's super interesting, because I'm like looking this up, trying to debunk it in my head, and I'm noticing, well, if they knew about Michael Faraday's 1923 discovery of using liquefied ammonia to create a cooling, that's when they discovered liquid ammonia cooling.
Well, maybe
they
before
still
that.
use liquid ammonia cooling in the milk plant here for Gerald.
I did want to mention this, Jeremy, which I didn't mention on your show last time you brought that up. We can cool it down to get better superconductive properties in a stationary condition, but we can actually get those same superconductive properties with a heated mercury, which goes to its vapor transition state much easier under heat and produces a greater amount of ions per unit volume at a higher temperature. So actually, it turns out that if the mercury is very hot, it works much better for this process, and we can still get the superconductive properties out of it as long as we can provide the polarization field within the liquid under high heat and pressure.
The thing
And
that
the pressure
connects
does
it
not have to be extreme, by the way.
Well, that the thing that is interesting to me about this. Okay, we looked at the Civil War blimps, and that there might be more going on with that, especially the chemical plants. There were stories about weather modification by the Confederates during the Civil War, and that the Union was trying to create, according to Smithsonian, rain by exploding dynamite in the sky with airships. So the other thing that makes me wonder is what other chemicals were they trying to experiment on to create weather? I mean, this is the time when you have people literally going from town to town trying to make weather with this stuff. Do you think that there's a connection there as well?
Who you asking?
Anybody? I mean, Walter, do you have
Oh,
thoughts?
I wish I had the chemical list memorized.
I find it interesting that what you mentioned here with, the possibly the use of airships and blowing dynamite in the sky and stuff. And I think of Aurora, Texas, which, by the way, which had nothing to do with an ET craft. It was a crash report that was mentioned during the 1890s airship mystery. Clearly an airship. All the people now that swear it was some ET craft, that's because one guy, one farmer standing there saying the burned beyond recognition human body that was reported on the ground after the crash. This one guy said, looks like a spaceman. And so all the ET hypothesis people just go to town on that. And everything else about it says that it was a human run, airship thing. But now I wonder what really caused that crash. Was he one of these guys trying to manipulate the weather and cause the explosion himself?
Also, thoughts on other, so beyond Germany, like Napoleon, because I know you've done some amazing work.
Before we leave Germany, just the Honeyboo 1 and 2. What are your thoughts on that? Like
Honeyboo, complete and utter
bullshit or real?
Bullshit. Yes, thank you. I wasn't sure if I could say BS.
Honeyboo already kind of sounds like
Honeyboo is complete horseshit. The line of crap that comes from came from post-war neo-Nazi sympathetic guys who published articles in Italy. And then it was pushed in the late 90s by a couple of guys who were known shysters. And,
okay, hold up though. Let me just ask a question. Honeyboo, are you saying that the word itself and the lore around it is bullshit, or are you saying that no craft resembling the Honeyboo ever had existed?
I'm saying that the Honeyboo craft that we are told the Nazis developed, this flying saucer thing, is bullshit.
Okay, well, I wish we could get Dan Foster on with good audio.
Good for he had
personally seen one. And I don't mean seen one in the sky, buddy. I mean, he was deployed in the United States military. He had a chance to go into a base and take a look at one of these things.
Really?
And it was fucking huge.
Really? Now, let me ask you something. What evidence has he produced for this? I'm hearing pins drop.
I'm not gonna try to back the story with.
No, I know.
I do not have it.
I wonder about anybody that is not dead. If the government
whether or not
doesn't kill you, it's
that this is genuinely true, and he's got other stuff related to antigravitics and quite a strange history. So you can choose to say it's.
I love how much of a skeptic Walter is. Actually, I think being a skeptic, we're like Jeremy's a skeptic. I think being a skeptic is really important.
Come on, basically it's take my word, bro. Is that what is that his precinct?
Oh no, it's not. Okay, he gets nothing out of it. He didn't tell the story until we got deep into it, and I asked him specific questions, and then he said, well, I haven't really said anything about this, but let me tell you something interesting that I seen while I was deployed.
I believe
it was a very fascinating series of events.
Hold on.
And he got nothing for it.
Hey, would that be the OSI handbook to befriend you first and gain your trust?
Hold on. There you go. Hold on. What? Okay.
Let Walter.
Do you really think that? Come on.
I'll wait.
Let Walter say. Hold on.
I'll wait. What branch of the service was he in? What was he in? When was he in? What was his job that he's claiming this? That he's, was he Army? What was he?
I will get you all that information. Let me ask him.
You don't off the top of your head. I mean, was he Army Special Forces? Was he?
No, I didn't memorize. I didn't memorize it because that particular story wasn't one of the most important things. Grab and Duggar was what I really wanted to pay attention to, which is a device basically anybody.
Well, no. Here's the thing. You should have paid attention to those other things, because in that it helps you determine if it's bullshit or not. It's not you. It's not your fault. It would be shame on him.
But also,
Dan is in the chat. He could actually fill this out. So, Dan, would you mind just while you're in the chat already? I mean, can you tell us what
Dan,
year?
tell us
Sorry, Dan, I'm not buying it.
Army. There's Dan right there. 64 Charlie. Army.
I'm with
Army.
you on that.
Okay,
We'll get
What year?
Dan. You can
Yeah,
talk about it.
that's a
what
story for
location?
another day. That's a debate and a story.
Yeah, let's
for
save it for another time.
day.
What I'd like though to wonder is, you got people like, what's his name? Bob Lazar. Like, how often do you think the
Bob
government?
Lazar's full of shit too, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
but how?
Yeah, I
I'll
believe
give you
that,
an
but
example.
I
Well, of
believe
course.
We all agree on
I
that.
don't believe
But
most of the other
how?
BS, but I believe
Hold on,
Dan.
I want to ask my question. How often does the military convince somebody that something is from space when they're showing it to them, that they've got or something, so that they don't know what it is and they sound crazy looking at it? You
It
think
would be
that's possible?
very easy to do. It would be it would be easy for them to do. And, it's just, here's the thing. I'm confident in my position because it's so many times people bring this up, but this guy. And then when you go look at it closer and you ask the questions, it always turns out, it's not
And there
as
might be a more
solid.
interesting story there. Exactly. It might be more interesting than what we think happened.
Well,
It might not be the same.
or
good dispositions.
Or
I mean,
it's a
Steve
planted
Campion's
fake
the
story.
first.
I mean, where did he see? Where did Dan see this? Hanabu.
Yeah.
Hey Dan, what was your location when you witnessed this thing? I remember you telling me, but would you mind putting it in?
Yeah, you can pop it up. We'll look at it. I also wanted to ask a question though about Napoleon,
Sure.
just because of the Nimsa thing. I think it's connected. I was looking at because you wrote the Napoleon book. It's like that's really interesting, and there's such a. It seems like such a more clear story than it is. You've got people that say Napoleon never existed, and everything in between. So yeah, you've seen it all. I found Napoleon's aerial crown, which was his airship, and it's pretty interesting because it's supposed to be a hydrogen balloon, but the story goes that Jean Coutel was using other kinds of chemistry to build the thing, and the more it looked like something out of Nimsa that was maybe more clandestine. I was wondering, do you have thoughts on Napoleon and airships and everything in between?
I'm getting into that in a subsequent volume because my Esoteric Napoleon book is just volume 1, and I'm in the middle of working on volume 2 now, and I will be getting into the exotic things that Napoleon attempted to pursue, probably pursued, would have, that kind of thing. So at this time, no, I got nothing to say about that yet, but it's going to be discussed in a future volume.
Epic. I'm very curious about all of the sorts of other technology that they were using. For instance, like the Moscow fire, if they were using, to set ablaze, because supposedly Moscow had a lot more stone than we realized, and that there was even maybe weather. Like they talk about major exodus out of the former regions of of old Moscow, right? That they've moved Moscow essentially after some weather hazards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
So
when you understand what Napoleon was really interested in and the people he surrounded himself with and various things, the whole story takes on a different angle.
interesting potential lead. I mean, this is 40, 50 years later, but still in the 1867, French immigrant Eugene Dominic Nicolet. There seems to be no Wikipedia article on this guy, but he apparently dissolved ammonia in water to reach a temperature of negative 20 degrees Celsius in a sealed room.
Interesting.
With another guy. So the fact that you said French immigrant, I mean, didn't speak out to me early on, but now that we're talking about Napoleon and the time period, and it kind of stuck out. So I was just figured I'd bring it back up as I didn't mention it before.
Yeah, a big part of my Napoleon series is I'm taking a close look at the various Bonapartists, those who, they were on the side of Napoleon, they supported him, and they also left France after Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's interesting looking at how France was essentially conquered, right? Because you've got a Corsican and you've got this new group of Nouveau Riche, and they're kind of pushing out of place like the former Holy Roman Empire oligarchy, it looks like. But then there's all this new technology that's emerging. So it seems like that's something that's underplayed in our study of the Napoleonic War.
And Napoleon is lied about too. It's the standard
3 feet tall, right? I mean,
he was the average height of most males of his time, in his time, and most of what we are traditionally taught about Napoleon was British bullshit propaganda. And there's even British historians in the last 30, 40 years that are admitting that and telling the more true story about Napoleon Bonaparte. I recommend Andrew Roberts. He's the leading British historian that thinks his anti-Napoleon peers are full of crap.
Interesting. So, but and also the idea of chemists. So we have these European chemists that are all kind of converging in these former countries that don't exist anymore, and there's new countries that are developing. So, what do you think is the goal? You say that they came to the West. Are they trying to build, because Nimsa, they were trying to build their own nation? It sounds like Israel. Sounds like a nice thing, right? Or are we missing something here?
Well, no, essentially, Nimsa, according to Del Shao, and he is, as I said at the top, he's really the original and only documented source we have of Nimsa. And by his description, they would have been very much involved in the Prussian nationalist push towards unification, which was a real thing. These Prussian nationalists, they were the ones driving the unification of Germany. So within the hypothesis that I and others have, this mysterious group Nimsa would have been the nationalist arm behind what would have become their military-industrial complex of the unified Germany. That's what I think.
And Coca-Cola and the Black Sun or something. So like even to this day, right? Or is that the idea that there's something that some people that are trying to build this, Antarctica headquarters, New World Order? Or what are they trying to build, the paperclip scientists or whatever?
It was about globalism. It was about really being the dominant group or entity, hand behind things in the world, of course. And the methods they use, I outlined earlier, where they just go in, they ingratiate themselves, and then they get control, and then they are pretty much the destroyers of that which they became the parasite of. And this happened to the United States through Operation Paperclip. They got into our military. They helped create our military-industrial complex. They were very much a hand inside our intelligence community,
do
you think they still are, though, right? Is this still the group?
I think Joseph Farrell, he refers to something called the Nazi International. And basically it is an organization that is, fascist corporate, in its nature. Look at it this way. They were the ones who were behind the rise of what we call Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, as we know it, was really the extreme expression of what hypothetically Nimsa appears to have been in the mid-19th century. Okay. And of course, Hitler and Himmler and their buddies took it too far. And once this group, this mysterious Nazi International, as Joseph Farrell calls it, once this group saw that Germany, the nation, was, going to fall under the Allies, they decided, okay, we need to pick our next host to go, be the parasite of. And naturally, they saw the rich potential of the United States at that time, and they took full advantage of it. I would say that I agree with Joseph Farrell and Daniel List and many, many others that their final move in their coup was the JFK assassination.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. In regards to the FBI.gov file that was released saying that Hitler went down to Argentina or whatnot. What is your opinion on that, good sir?
I think I have no problem with the idea that Hitler did not die in the bunker. In fact, I think increasingly more and more people are seeing that, that's very likely. And, the
I want to make a musical about it, and he'll have this little corgi and he'll have a black girlfriend and live in San Bernardino in South Paraguay, There
you go. And,
Mein Kampf too, and then he cries.
Yeah. I have no problem with the Hitler survival idea. He probably very likely did survive World War II. But remember, after the war, by that time, Martin Bormann would have been the one, really running the post-World War II show for a while.
Wow. So also recently, a big thing that's been on the mind of people is ET versus AI, right? And I know this is a thing in the movie, even AI, that It's about, you think aliens, but it's really, this is kind of an evolved artificial intelligence that we mistake as aliens. Is that something that's going on right now? Because we were told that this is first contact season, right? Everyone's supposed to be having first contact, and I've been seeing everyone talking to AI. And is AI somehow connected, do you think?
To
ET.
I would think that a civilization capable of traversing the stars is capable of the advanced AI like we're seeing, and actually, you could argue that it would make sense for ETs to reveal themselves or introduce themselves to a world like ours through AI. Sure, anything. If you're going to go there, anything's possible. Do I think specifically necessarily that's going on? I think we're doing some amazing things technologically, and a lot of folks who don't, like you guys, watch the development of these things. You're up on the companies and the very down to earth places that are developing this stuff. But the average person, they in some cases are letting their imaginations run away from them. Oh, it must be the ETs. It must be see, this ET hypothesis now is so ingrained into our culture that it's very convenient for anybody that wants to slip something in under that shroud. Oh, it's ET, or the people will think it's ET. And here's the irony. Of course, I think ETs exist, and I think they've been coming to this planet, and I think they still do. That's the irony. It's just that somebody here is using the ET theme to cover up very human technologies that are being developed, and other possibly nefarious activities.
And do you think that some of these groups that we're talking about, like the Black Sun or the Nimsa kind of adjacent groups, or the origin groups, that they're in contact with something beyond human?
It's just as possible as our government, being in anybody who has, I think anybody on Earth who's got the capability to have a presence in space has at some point likely encountered who else is up there. Yeah.
And they're just kind of trying to hide it.
Well, think about it. Knowledge is power, and people like to they like to be power brokers. And it's like, hey, we're in touch with this civilization from another world, so we kind of want to play that close to vest and use it for whatever negotiations we can do on the high levels of power brokerage. I think that there are probably some very good reasons why any group in touch with an off-world civilization would keep it to themselves.
I also think about Antarctica and the groups of different states of nations that are allowed to be in Antarctica, and the German territories ended up in Argentina's hands, and Russia still has a big chunk. What do you think about Antarctica? Is there something going on there?
Oh, I do think there's something going on there that they're not telling us about. What it is exactly, it's hard for us to know. Now, here's the thing. I know there's been a bunch of stories about, in the last, the last 10 years or 20 years or whatever, there was a big hole found down there, this underground tunnel, and this team of scientists and commandos went in there, and they found old machinery or giant machinery, and they met these aliens and stuff. Okay. We're hearing it all the time in UFO conspiracy land, right? Well, here's what's interesting. I was told basically the same story in the mid 1990s, okay, by my mentor. And he told me that same thing had happened around 1960. So what I think of that specific narrative is that it's somebody in the intelligence community is using that as ink for the water. In other words, they bandy that out once in a while. Maybe they share it with a few people and they tell them, now you keep this to yourself. This is on the QT, so that when it shows up publicly or shows up where it shouldn't be discussed, they know, well, we shared this narrative with these individuals. One of them must have run his mouth or something, because it's a narrative that just keeps popping up. It's not a new narrative, but it's just new to a lot of people now. But I do think there's something weird going on down there, because look at all the luminaries that visited around that time that they
Right?
were
Like,
visiting.
why is John Kerry going down there? Why
On
is
election night. On election night.
on election
he's
night, and
down there.
why is Kirill, the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, going down there?
Yeah, he goes down to bless a chapel, around the same time. And Buzz makes that weird comment. There's something horrible, terribly evil down there. It's like, what the hell? So
On Twitter.
naturally, people's imaginations are just going to, run with that. And then, unfortunately, we have the bullshit storytellers in this community who come out and I was a commando and I saw this, that, and the other, and yet, when you ask them to provide something more than their claim.
Well, the Fitbit story was good, right? You remember that? There was a bunch of military guys wearing Fitbits, and it exposed their GPS, and it showed a bunch of people in an underground base and what the base looked like in Antarctica.
True.
So there's stuff coming out.
Yeah, well, but remember, we've had underground bases since the 1950s. Just look at Richard Sauter's research. Through publicly available info, he shows you that the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force started working with building underground facilities back in the 50s. It's no mysterious secret that we've been developing that, and we know very practical and comparatively mundane reasons for why they would do this. So why not on Antarctica? Because think about it. You go underground in Antarctica, you're removing yourself from the harsh conditions on the surface, right? So an existence of an underground facility shouldn't be grounds alone for backing up the wild stories. It is something to consider, to ponder, but it might be that the wild stories have grown out of a much more mundane reality.
For
and
sure.
I know I'm a party pooper saying that for a lot of people, but come on, folks, we're all adults.
Exactly. And so whereabouts was that Fitbit one? And was it right on the South Pole, or was it just at like McMurdo or somewhere around there? Because Greenland, we know they also have similar ones too. Whatnot. Interesting.
You see that? It's like pretty much in the middle. I mean, that's definitely further forward and out than you're supposed to be. I mean, I don't think Mr. Beast got to openly go this far into Antarctica, right?
Well, I have a question. How many of you guys are familiar with who Todd Carmichael is?
Sounds familiar, but
Todd Carmichael is a guy who made his fortune with a coffee company. He also, for a while, held the record for the fastest solo trek across Antarctica. And he was already in his 40s, that guy right there. And I'm wondering, solo trek across Antarctica to the South Pole. I'm wondering which route he took. Off the top of my head, I don't know. So I'm wondering if he went across an area that people are saying, nobody can go across because of all this mysterious stuff, or if he took a very well-trod trail. I don't know. But
I think you have to take a well-trod trail, or
right?
at the very least, they have to tell you where you can go. When Mr. Beast went, for instance, it was a big deal, and he named Mount Shopify because he got to go to the first one to that particular mountain. So Shopify paid him to name it Shopify. But they had to carry out all of their urine. They had to have these bottles for all of their waste and everything. Nothing was left behind, and they had to go exactly where they were supposed to go. They had to have tour people with them. They had to make all these plans for 3 to 5 years. So I think it is pretty much a guided. It's almost as bad as the Soviet Union tours were in the 70s.
Yeah, it's much more controlled than some people think then. Okay, because that makes sense to me. I mean, that is, if I'm not mistaken, that seems like that's singularly the most controlled
place on Earth,
territory on Earth, right? I mean,
there was the New Zealand 901 in 79. This flight that was going through Antarctica, which is one of the reasons they don't let planes fly over Antarctica. I think is because this one hit a mountain or hit a volcano or it just crashed, and then they had to send people to go get everything because they couldn't leave it there because of environmental damage, and it was just horrifying. So that's kind of been the story that's kept people from going back to Antarctica, on top of the fact that if you go, they don't let you, right? Because the militaries of many countries work together to keep everybody out except for themselves.
Right. Well, think about this too. I mean, Antarctica is kind of this pristine environment, a time capsule of ages ago. And so everything that we screw up and leave behind there could affect scientific measurements in the future to understand Earth's frozen history and what's been trapped there since the last epoch when it got frozen over in the first place.
Yeah, like Lake Vostok and them drilling into it and finding different life down there that hadn't been exposed to the air for, I think it was 100,000 or maybe 100 million years, one or the other. I forget what they claim. But that there's massive mountain ranges throughout Antarctica and that the ice sheet gets up to 2 miles high in some spots.
Do you remember the 33rd Antarctic Treaty?
2 miles of water. 2 miles of frozen water is an absolutely insane number. Really? Does it really get that high?
The 33rd Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting was at the UN meeting room, and this is the way that they designed the room to look like Antarctica. So you've got this sort of rim of trees, and you've got Antarctica, and then at the center you have another set of green growing. And so it kind of is symbolic of what we're, this reset or this environmental shift or something, or that there's more already there, that they're saying in Antarctica.
It looks a lot like a interpretive representation of Admiral Byrd's reports.
It does, actually. Yeah, I was thinking what it made me wonder is, what if, because I'm a big believer in the nugget of truth, the nugget of truth approach, that, look at the wild story or what appears to be a wow story and consider that, okay, there is some nugget of truth in that. And, maybe, the big secret thing they're studying down there is a spot, kind of like a biodomed type controlled area where they've been able to inject their own controlled environment that has warmed it up. So maybe they've pull it out of hibernation, so to speak, and they're maintaining flora that existed 100,000 or more years ago, and it's very sensitive, and they have to be very careful in controlling it. And maybe they are finding. I don't think it's crazy to think that they have actually found ruins or relics of a past civilization. I don't think that's crazy at all.
No, not at all. I mean, there was a time where that land was not frozen over. It was habitable. Why would you not expect to find humans doing what humans always do, building structures, geoforming land, all the stuff that they do? I mean, of course it's going to be left over.
And maybe there is evidence. Maybe there is evidence that there was a technologically advanced, like on our level and beyond, civilization in the past, and maybe something they did with their own technology, monkeying around, doing some crazy Frankenstein Tesla stuff. And that's what caused the cataclysm. And maybe that's the so-called evil that Buzz and others privy to it, was referring to. And the concern is, wow, if we thought atomic bombs were bad, this technology we cannot get out. Because I heard on another show, somebody saying that the Antarctic Treaty is the only treaty that the nations involved have never broken. Now, if that's true, that's really interesting.
Well, you have John Kerry and Krill going down there at similar times, right? Like, what truly is going on down there?
Also, the idea that there's this, the ice sheet, whether it melts or not, I mean, it serves as a pretty great disguise or camouflage. I mean, it's hard
that is a great diagram. I've never seen that before, but what a truly fantastic graphic.
Yeah, I remember they actually had something like this in the
separates half of it, and it looked like that Fitbit part where it was in a major ice crater, so it could be where that ocean goes through the two land masses, and that would be an under ice sheet base that could have been exposed, which right, who knows what they have there.
But I tend to think that there's something startling in regard to human history that has been found there. I do think that.
I also do suspect that, just like have that natural intuition that something's down there, maybe Atlantis or the ruins of it, or prior.
The idea of there being something underground, though, that's also because you've got all these across the world, these discrete underground military bunkers. You've got these huge military.
Sure.
Do you think that they're ever interacting with, some underground other, beings?
If those stories are true and there is somebody under the surface, yeah, I would think that at some point, they've been encountered. There's been some type of contact. In this book here, Shimmering Light, I wrote about my dad's story that he started telling me in 1974. At the same time, I also present the very strong possibility that it could have been a false narrative, given to him to cover something else.
Right.
But he certainly went to his death believing, I could tell psycho-emotionally believing that what he told me was true. And it had to do with encountering some people who were part of an underground civilization. The problem is he was in the U.S. Air Force in the 1950s. The problem with that is he was in the Aerospace Medicine Command, okay, under that division. Aerospace Medicine Command in the U.S. Air Force in the 1950s, of the military branches, they were the most turned on by what they learned from the CIA on MK Ultra. And remember, MK Ultra was all about the false narrative,
Right.
okay? And so you do the math, and that's why I say my dad might have thought it was true, but it's very possible that it was a false narrative. So I question even his story, but not 100%,
Yeah. There's always something in there.
It's like those memes you see with they say the odds of your little kitty cat, killing you with a Tesla laser or pulling a knife out of the kitchen and killing you in your sleep are very slim, but not entirely zero. And that's the way I handle my dad's story. There's also reasons to argue that some part of it, something about what he said, was true. So, for what that's worth.
Right. Oh, so another thought on this, we talked a bit about the idea of AI or something, but really AI, if it is man-made and you got this idea of something in the future that is us, maybe it's not alien. It's something like we are. I mean, so some astronauts have been saying maybe these UFOs are time travelers from the future. Do you think that there's something to this that we're thinking of alien? It's really just us.
Oh, I have to be honest with you. Where time travel is concerned, it's hard for me to be purely objectively skeptical because I'm so intrigued by the phenomenon of time, and I lean towards some type of movement through or extraordinary experience of the phenomenon of time being real. So I'm a little bit, I guess you could say I'm a little biased in that regard, because at this point in time, I do believe that something like it is possible. I right now, I think that someone figured out how to definitely look through time. I'm so open to time travel that I'm not an objective critic of it.
I'm open to subjectivity here. I mean, some of the thoughts that we've been thinking about, we've had Cynthia Sue Larson talking about AI from the future. So if a computer is on for 100 years and somehow it's able to stay on, the idea that maybe the ion flow can allow it to remember. And so it has sort of a measurement of distance of time because it's able to think about this moment now and that moment in the future, but also interact with itself in the past. If that's able to happen in any way, then even just using our technology to travel for us, we would be able to interact with ourselves.
Yeah, we would be. There is that paradox you see in time travel fiction. Can you really meet your past self if you are you? Wouldn't you just go back in time and be observing all?
Could you have a Zoom call with your past self? Maybe easier.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Or I see. I do have trouble with the encountering yourself thing. I just and I don't know why. It's a me thing. I'm sure other people can say, well, here's how it could be so. That kind of thing. But, my view of time is that it's not just circular, it's spherical. And that somewhere in big picture, that whole idea that everything is happening at once, it's all happening in this sphere. Okay. So, if you can pull yourself off that sphere or go to the center and kind of go land wherever you want on the sphere, you could land in any time period you would want. Now, here's the thing: as you're experiencing time, we experience it sequentially, right? Minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, in a linear fashion. That's our general common experience of time. But that might be when you're on that spherical surface up close, you have to experience it in a linear fashion. But maybe if you pull yourself up off of the sphere or ball of time, that's when you pull yourself out of that linear experience of it, and you just get a bigger picture of how everything's happening all at once, which is a hard thing for our minds to wrap around and explain sufficiently. You kind of have to agree, for sake of discussion, to pretend that this is possible. And I've done those mental exercises, and I've thought about that. I've even come to this personal conclusion that it is possible to travel backward in your own personal life, your own timeline. Okay. And I believe you right now. I'm thinking, I hate to use the word believe, I'm thinking that it's possible when you die, at your point, when your body dies, you reach this point where you can, you have options. And one of the options is to jump back in your own timeline of the life you just lived. Okay. I think there's something about the transposition of numbers involved here. In other words, if you die at 71, you can jump back to your 17-year-old self and relive all those years. Same with if you die at 63, you can jump back to 36. And now the problem with that is when you get to, I think it's the second half of the decades of the life, and it's of your life. And what if you've only lived that life one time? You wouldn't be able to go forward in the jumping fashion. You would have to relive it and then maybe live longer the next time. And you can see,
right? Because
you can see how convoluted it can get. But I have played with the idea and considered that this could be done, what I just described. But I have no evidence or proof for it. I admit when I say something is hypothetical, I don't go out there in the community and say I know this to be true to get a bunch of attention.
Right. No, but it's
on a
interesting
radio
thinking
show.
about time is an interesting idea, especially because, and I think, sorry, Jeremy is saying he's going to have to leave, but Jeremy, it was great to have you, and we hope to do more alien scientist stuff. But the idea of time as a dimension, if we're able to produce
sorry, I got to dip out, guys.
No worries.
Love
Do
you,
you
bro.
want me to end it on your channel, or
see you later.
going on your channel? We'll probably do another hour here on ours. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and he's gone. All right. Well, we'll leave it for now.
Well, I mean, just the idea of something that can measure time, like we're talking about AI, if we create a system, the way we can use telescopes, radioscopes to see parts of space, see things that we can't see with our eyes, that we could actually create something that can measure time or be in multiple times for us.
Yeah.
The other thought is like femto technology, the idea that we're printing, beyond nanoscale. If you could copy a moment so clearly as to have all of the quarks and quantum particles in the correct, couldn't you reproduce a place of that was this moment? Essentially, you could take everything that was going on right now, copy it, and produce it in another part of space. And so that could be useful for just producing what we think of as this same time. We go back to the same time because we produced something that is going on forward from that time, but it might lead to slight asymmetries, Berenstein or something. Do you think that they're messing with that stuff? Like,
I think I think it's possible that somebody has figured out how to mess with that. It speaks to the multiple dimension, hypothesis that each time, rather than messing with the specific reality, what happens is another timeline is created, so that you have these countless timelines.
Yeah.
There have been times where I have wondered. I was in Iraq in 2003, and I was doing my job, and part of my job one night after midnight in the back streets of Mosul, me and the guys I was working with, we were riding around in a car doing some shit, and we had our guns hidden, and we were wearing jalabiyas and keffiyas. We were dressed like Saudis, and in an unarmored car, which and we got surrounded by a pickup truck pulls in front of us, blocks our way in an alley. We get surrounded by 9 guys with AK-47s ready to just right at us. Obviously nothing bad happened. Here I am. Or did it? sometimes I wondered, did they shoot us in that timeline? And did we or I jump to a new timeline at the moment I would have otherwise been killed? Because my life after that, there's been things that just seem slightly off, things about life and reality that just don't seem to work as I understood them, life and reality, before that moment. And here's the thing that makes me wonder that is when that happened, I remember inside everything just went to a peaceful calm. Everything slowed down. I mean, I vividly remember looking out the windows and I can see it now, these barrels of these AK-47s, like right there on the other side of the window. I'm looking, I can see the texture of the metal, and I can see the scare. These guys ended up being the Iraqi security force. They weren't bad guys, but it was, had we twitched the wrong way, then maybe we did. Maybe they blasted the hell out of the car, but did I jump to an alternate timeline in which I survived it? And am I the me from the other timeline now living in this timeline? In other words, maybe the weirdness that I'm experiencing is I'm supposed to be of another timeline, and now I'm ill-fitted to this one. These
weird
are the
as that sounds, it makes a lot more sense. I mean, so many people I know have gone through some near-death experience.
Mandela, right? Like for those that experience the Mandela effect, could that be an aspect of it? And then it takes into like dreaming and the lucid dreaming aspects of it. Of are you going into these different timelines and fractals and realms of it?
Yeah. Can you, in certain dreams, have the experience of seeing years ahead? Is the experience of having a dream like that actually another you has jumped back? So what you're seeing in your dream, you've done this in your sleep, but what you're seeing in your dream is kind of a preview of what's to come. I mean, is this an artifact of being able to jump through time into your own timeline using your consciousness? Now, what's interesting is we've seen this in fiction through the works of Jack Finney and Richard Matheson, specifically Jack Finney's Time and Again, I think. Richard Matheson is now called Somewhere in Time. And they both used a system of time travel that was anchored to the will, throwing your consciousness, therefore yourself, back in time. Okay, now they did that dramatically. What's interesting is they wrote this stuff around the time we are told scientific remote viewing was being toyed with and developed. And it's eerily resonant with what we're told about remote viewing, what these characters in Finney and Matheson do. So did Finney and Matheson learn something true about time and our relation to it and the ability to travel through time? Did they learn it from military guys who were being, trained in remote viewing? Particularly when you read Finney's novel, the first one, Time and Again, it's described as an army project. This was published in 1970. It's described as an army project. There's all these time travelers who have these little apartment boxes, cubicles, and they would just use their mind to focus on their target time period. They would be surrounded by clothes and artifacts and stuff of that period. And through the will, they could throw themselves back in time. When you read the book, it sounds a lot like what we subsequently learned how remote viewers work. And so I wonder what Finney knew. I wonder what Matheson knew, because Richard Collier in Somewhere in Time totally does the same thing that, Finney describes. Of course, Matheson's book came out 5 years later, but they were contemporaries. They probably knew each other. Did Matheson know? An associate of mine, a guy named Seshari, he and I have some private letters between us in which we have fleshed this suspicion out about Matheson's Somewhere in Time. Sesh doesn't want me to publish this or talk about certain details of it publicly, so I can't. But it's a mental exercise. It's an analysis. But as far as the Mandela effect, I kind of lean towards I'm friends with Dr. Farrell, and he and I have had a lot of late night conversations, private conversations for years now, suspecting that maybe something to do with CERN, whatever is really going on with CERN, having something to do with what we're calling the Mandela effect. But I think there's either multiple timelines involved there, but somebody's doing something. All this to say, I would agree with you. I agree with the suspicion that somebody's doing something to mess with past events as we go through the timeline of the now.
Monkey trying to control it. Oh, you know Frank Zero, right?
Yeah.
Zero. What's up, Frank Zero? How you doing? You know Walter Bosley.
Hey, man.
Yeah. Hey, I think we've crossed paths before. Yeah.
I've interviewed you many times. Yeah.
That's what it is. Thank you. I'm sorry. It's just like it becomes a
face. The face is harder. Yeah.
No, Walter, it's okay, man. You do so
that's
much
right.
of this stuff. But yeah,
That's
we've
right.
done video interviews. We've done written interviews.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Frank, do you have any questions or thoughts on space and aliens and all the things and space-time continuum affecting?
Do you have any questions on the space aliens or space time? You kind of cut out. What was that?
Exactly. Something like that.
Okay.
Space-time continuum, aliens, hashtags abound.
Yeah, no questions. But I was listening earlier to the Nimsa stuff and the Project Paperclip stuff, and last couple of minutes I was not listening. But where are we?
So we're talking about the idea that maybe CERN or in general that space-time control is being committed by some groups, or perhaps might be. The idea that the Mandela effect or something is because of this, and also maybe that aliens, our idea of aliens might be UFO time travelers, something that's from the future, that we're interacting with something on the space-time level, or something that's aware to travel time like space. They're more they're
space
dimensionally
time.
aware.
If you're going from one star to another, time is an aspect of that you're going to be included in your warp drive or whatever technology bubble thing that you're using to go through it, right? Like whether it's a wormhole or field or something, time's going to be included into it. And on that part, Walter, what's your opinions on the Tic-Tacs, and is that like a time interdimensional? Is it alien? What do you think it is?
Nah, that's just advanced military technology that's being developed in secret that will be intended for the military, and there's nothing mysterious about it. It's just secret. It is advanced, and that whole narrative that it's something mysterious falls apart when you look closely at it. And so no, now I'm impressed with whatever it actually may be. But no, since the beginning, going back to 2017, that's when I did my first close look at it, and nothing that has emerged since has changed my mind. In fact, it's just even more convinced me that it's just some pretty cool technology that our side's developing, and I think that's what it is.
But also at the same time of Werner von Braun, you've got like Arthur C. Clarke, and there's a big push again, similar to the 1800s, to have contact with something, right? Like, are they propagandizing that, or is there really like a lust for interacting with something new? Like
who propagandizing what?
Well, like Arthur C. Clarke comes to mind. Just the idea of saying that we should be making contact, we ought to be trying to. I mean, Reagan made a speech, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a natural human desire to look. That's what fueled, coming to the New World. The Europeans they wanted to, it was time to go find some new place to, exploit the resources and such. And so, it was the same sentiment. We got to go to the New World. We got to go to the New World. Oh, there's people over there. The people of the New World.
Atlantis. But Arthur C. Clarke's Sentinel, right before 2001, it's not a monolith. It looks a lot like a Nimsa craft or a Sonora airship to me.
Well, on the cover of that book, the artistic depiction, and I think you could argue the description, right?
Spy balloon almost.
But
it's between Nimsa and spy balloon for sure. But this is before the monolith. So before the monolith, we're looking at things that are a lot, again, more similar to the older depictions. So
and also remember between Clarke's story and the film that Kubrick did, Kubrick veered way off of Clarke's story
Right.
in
And
a lot of ways.
they made Arthur C. Clarke rewrite it. So
Mhm.
2001 is written at the same time as the movie. So it
Mhm.
seems like they both had somebody overhead telling them what they're supposed to be writing about, perhaps.
I would say that Kubrick. I'm in the camp that Kubrick was trying to tell us something, and no, it's not that we didn't really go to the moon and he faked it. I am.
He's got bigger
I'm
things
not.
to talk about.
I'm not in that camp. I that's another thing I laugh at. But
Well, he had to
now,
fake the moon landing on location, so it was expensive.
yeah. Well, don't
When
get me wrong.
When
I
Kubrick
suspect
changes
they might have
something, sorry,
shot
but
some scenes on the ground ahead of time and then used them if and when they encountered.
I don't
other
think so.
Yeah, I mean, but this isn't even about the moon. Like, what is it really about?
I think the big secret about the Apollo program is that technology that they used to get there and especially to leave the moon was just it was somewhat what we would call exotic. I think that's the big secret. But the stuff we saw was on the moon. We did go to the moon. We haven't been told, in my opinion, we haven't been told everything about the technology used to help get us there and back, and we have not been told everything they found there. That's what I think the big secrets to the moon landings are.
Walter, do you think that when there's so many little stories and you read so many different ways or sources that it could have come from, but do you think that they really were sort of intimidated by some craft on that crest above them as they were landing? Do you think that story has any validity?
Here's the thing. I don't think that story has validity, but I think there's a nugget of truth in the suspicion of something along those lines.
Sure.
I'm not the only one. There's been people before me that have been trying to point out that particularly our early space program seemed to be some type of palm leaf to something or someone out there.
Yeah.
I think Joseph Farrell's one of them, but he's not the only one who points out that this plaque, we came in peace, to the moon, was to try to convince somebody out there now that we really were coming in peace. But I think it's very possible that, yeah, something more is known about who's out there and what's out there, and maybe they were walking on eggshells. Maybe there was something, because something to those stories, not specifically how it's told with the big craft.
Right.
But look, that's possible, because if
Yeah.
there's another civilization able to do that, why not? Why couldn't they have had their ships watching, saying, "Hey, here we are"? I'm not discounting it entirely, but there could be something about the nature of the moon itself.
Yeah. I mean, they could have gotten there and just seen everything Richard Hoagland has tried to put in 5 different colors
or
to get
a
us
lot
to
of
go.
it. I'm not buying the glass dome thing, but I certainly have no problem with the idea that they found some type of ruin there, or
majestic structures or something would have been enough to
Yeah.
mystify them.
So I think, and then you hear the stories that the astronauts themselves,
Right. That's
I
the
think through legitimate sources, they really did say this, like the weird murkiness of their memory, the weird nausea that would overcome them when they tried to go veer too close to certain details.
That was
They're
my other
isolated
question
for like
for you.
30 days, right? They were isolated for 30 days when they got back, so they weren't able to have contact with anybody.
That was my other inquiry. If we have all these different situations where the astronauts seem kind of off, and if we throw away any information about it being faked and them just hiding that, why did they come back in that first conference? They were so soberingly haunted.
Because of maybe what they saw. I mean, think about it. They were up there. They would have been the ones firsthand seeing things that, hypothetically, that we still don't know about. And maybe it was very sobering. Maybe what they, maybe the ruins they saw up there, that can be sobering. Now, I have not personally verified these kinds of stories that we hear. I've learned it from the same sources you guys probably have. I've never really done a deep dive on whether these stories of the nausea and all that are true. To the extent that I'm aware of it, I come away with the impression that, okay, this looks legitimate, but I at the very least, I'm okay with saying, yeah, I think they definitely saw something up there that we're not being told about, that's been kept
Why
secret.
do you think that Buzz Aldrin told that little girl 3 years ago when she said, how was it? It must have been really exciting. What was it like to be the first man on the moon? And he went, well, the big secret is we never went. And then he
Yeah,
smiles very
she's like, why didn't
sweetly
we
to
ever go
her.
back? And then she said she asked why
No,
we
he
never go
goes,
back. And it's
he
like,
goes, we never went.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other quotes. I mean, still.
So we didn't. He said, well, we didn't go.
Are-
We didn't. That's the thing.
Are we looking for layers of mind control? Are we looking for layers of secrecy and the emotional reaction as such? Or
here's an interesting thing about that. Again, in my book Shimmering Light, I talk about remember, the Air Force was the most turned on of the military branches of MK Ultra. They went off and started their own independent MK Ultra program. This was under the U.S. Air Force Aerospace Medical Division, okay, which was directly involved with putting man in space. Now, we know MK Ultra was real. It's not fantasy. We know the Air Force started their own independent MK Ultra program. That's history. That's not fantasy, okay? We know that the Air Force was the ones who really started our manned space program. So why would we suddenly, if they had developed MK Ultra and we were using this to cover secrets, we know that the CIA came clean in 1973 that they had been messing with this all through the 60s. Why not NASA? So the evidence suggests, okay, that the Apollo astronauts, Apollo 11 specifically, and any of them that went up there, would have had this applied to them upon return. And that could explain the murkiness. That could explain the reluctance, the awkwardness. That could explain the morose.
Sort of question how they go in, how we would go into these weird different answers or thought processes.
Yeah.
And especially
just like a out of sight, out of mind, out of mind, out of sight hex on us all.
Yeah, or just even a false narrative laid. Remember that's what MK Ultra would do is to suppress the actual activity. What they were seeking was to be able to lay a false narrative in the psyche over that. It's called psychic driving or piling or something like that. And this is what they were fooling with, and this is what they were having some success being able to do to a degree. So, in my opinion, that's what they would have done hypothetically to the Apollo 11 astronauts, any astronauts that went to the moon. They come back and they're put through that, and a false narrative is laid as kind of a blocker to what they really saw, so they wouldn't talk about it.
Which might have been some really Solomonic magic stuff. You don't even know. Who knows what it was?
Who knows what they saw? Yeah, it honestly, in all fairness, it could have been anything along the spectrum that a lot of people suspect. But
I would just ask then if you're their handlers or how these programs work and you're above them as an authority figure of any kind, why would you go, we know they're going to be really kind of whacked out and don't seem like their souls in their body for the next 30 minutes. Let's stick them on TV. We already got the whole...
They waited 30 days, 33 days or something.
Did not know that.
They were kept in isolation for 33 days.
Yeah, okay.
Quarantine.
I did hear that, yeah.
They were in quarantine, and look, what my dad went through, I was told, when I was on active duty in the Air Force, I was told by someone who up the chain from me, not in an official, this is how they do things. This is how they tell you some of the juiciest stuff. It's not in an official briefing. It's a side conversation, in your off-duty hours, okay? I was told what they did to my dad involved hypnosis, and they suppressed his actual memory of the real events that happened. And get this, they keyed the renewal of the hypnosis to the cycle, to the full moon. So what the way they did it was every month when he would see the full moon, it would reactivate in his psyche and suppress. But here's the thing they couldn't control. It was kind of it looks like bipolarism because the mind is struggling with this. And I was told that through the years and over the decades, it begins to break down a little bit, and it affects the person deeply because they know that there's a truth in there deep in there, but they can't quite reach it. They can't quite bring it to the surface, but they're more than willing to talk about what was likely the false narrative. And my dad would get really emotional. I mean, this was not fun for him. And so when you look at, in fact, I think there's one press conference, right, where all the Apollo 11 astronauts, I mean, they've been back for 30 days and they're still just kind of really, they're like really depressed or almost nervous. It's strange.
You know Project Capricorn? The film.
Tell me what it is.
The movie. The film with O.J. Simpson.
Capricorn 1. Yeah, a high school buddy of mine.
I'm sorry.
A high school buddy of mine, his dad was a helicopter pilot in Hollywood, and he flew one of those choppers in the movie.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, I definitely saw that movie. And here's the thing, a lot of the rumors about we faked the moon landing did not emerge until after that movie came out. Oh, and you want to know where the origin, at least the credited origin with the we faked the moon landing came from?
National Lampoon? Just kidding.
No, right here where I live in the San Bernardino Valley, the guy was, he was at the time, I believe, a University of Redlands student, but he lived right here in Redlands, which is a town I go get coffee in every morning. Oh, yeah. And so right here in the goofy old Inland Empire, Southern California, that we faked the moon landing. And I as I understand it, it might have been motivated
to that idea. Yeah,
movie stores. Yeah, of course, because it's fun. Right now we've got the most cynical society I think we've ever had in our history. So everybody wants to say everything's BS.
Well, it's one thing to say
some of it is.
Everything is BS, but it's about something true a lot of the time. So we have to find out what it was really about. You put a lot of money into it, but it makes me wonder, like, why did the Soviets? What do you think about the Soviet space program? Right? I mean, they didn't do it, or what? What's going on with the Soviets?
Well, here's the thing with the Soviets, and I worked against the Soviets for a while, so I had to be intimately familiar with how they work.
I read that Spy versus Spy in Mad Magazine. I saw you.
Yeah, there you go. See, that's it. That's how it works. Here's
one
the thing
you got to give the Soviets credit for is, man, they've got some good logos and poster art. Gotta admit, that is pretty cool.
They've got great monuments and poster and everything. But here's the thing about the Russians. Okay, the Soviets, because the Russia of today is not the Soviet Union. Right, that's Ukraine, a whole other peeve of mine.
Ukraine, Kazakhstan, yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing about the Soviets. Had we been faking that, they would have known it, and they would not have been quiet about it.
Right.
No doubt.
They never came out and said America's faking it. I'm telling you, folks, we went to the moon. But
why did they fail? Or sorry,
we're not.
I agree completely. We certainly did.
We're not being told everything that was found there is what I think the big secret was, and part of it also
everything that was used.
Well, my point with Capricorn 1. Go, Walter. Sorry.
The Soviets might not have been able to, it might have been the life support issue. Our life support systems, I think, were better than theirs. Remember, they used to just throw people up, and let them burn alive in the rocket. That's how we'll learn what we can learn. They would do stuff that, not that we didn't do heinous stuff, but as far as we know,
Joseph Carroll in your chat saying one reason they failed was because their big lunar boosters were sabotaged.
That too. See,
Walter. No, I'm just kidding.
There was stuff going on, but that I mean, we wouldn't have been able to get to everything. If they could do it, I think they would have done it.
That's interesting about the medical. What did you say earlier? The program your father, the medical.
Well, he was under the command of what's in the Air Force Aerospace Medicine Division.
Aerospace medicine. So the fact that aerospace medicine might have been the problem, and you think maybe we got our aerospace medicine from somewhere else. I mean, that's kind of interesting. We had maybe.
No. When you say somewhere else, that makes it all mysterious.
Not necessarily aliens.
Yeah. We what we did was the combined effort, because ours were no slouches. Let's not assume that because of this Operation Paperclip stuff that our own scientists were a bunch of dummies. No, that's not the case. What it was the combined effort. What those German Luftwaffe guys knew, when you brought it over and combined with what our guys were doing, we ultimately made it work. And it just might be that between the sabotage that Joseph mentioned, which I agree with, and also, the distinct problems with life support. I think there's multiple technological reasons why the Soviets didn't make it. Because another thing is, if they had, they would have bragged about that.
Yeah.
So
right.
you know,
Right.
as
mean,
anybody would and should, you know, you do something like that.
Their
My
shuttle
point with
program,
Capricorn
was
1,
almost
one
more
day.
advanced right before they ended it all, and that it was actually they put their shuttle up around Earth before NASA's shuttle went up, I believe, and it was a one drone flight. It was radio controlled flight that they did before, and then they never used them again.
But the fact the ISS, everything stands out. It's interesting to
Well,
me that we get credit for the moon, they get credit for the space
That was
station.
right before the Soviet Union failed.
Okay,
Though.
First of all, the shuttles, the Soviet shuttles, it must have been some other model of shuttle, because the Burion, I think it's called, that was a total ripoff of our design, and it was a hollow model essentially to say, hey, look, we're doing this, but nothing ever happened with it. So if they got some shuttle thing off the ground,
Well, that's the one I was speaking of. The
Burion never flew.
No, it never went up. Okay, my mistake. I thought I had read that they sent it up once before, and it was unmanned. It was radio commanded.
No, that sounds like, that's, from what I understand, that's an apocryphal
Internet
tale.
story could be.
Yeah.
It sounds like the Nazi missiles with TVs on them to be more or less the first type of drones, but unrelated to air and space. Space programs. But I was going to say, the reason I brought up Capricorn 1 was because it seemed, if you examine that movie and you kind of put yourself in the shoes of these guys who trained for years and years and got everything together, education, physically, whatever, to be an astronaut, and the day the mission is going to happen, they just walk them into a side room and they go, we know your daughter's on her way to school. We can take that car out, no problem. We know your wife and your son is on a helicopter. We can drop that helicopter right now. So you need to understand, as you're walking out there, you're saying you went to the Mars, and you hit the Mars. You're saying you went to Mars, etc. And I just use that example to be like, well, if I went through all that, I really had to lie about something so colossal after trying so hard personally, I would look exactly like the astronauts in that 33 days after, kind of weary of the hand that feeds me with NASA and the government now, and also just kind of scared for my life, or scared for what existence means now, or you can't really tell what's going on with their existential breakdowns. But I think that a lot of other note I wanted to add in Paperclip, when you guys were talking about it earlier, I think we always overlook a lot of stuff that we brought over that wasn't just because we needed rocket scientist von Braun. And I think the intelligence sector, and as far as us arming it and throwing it back into Germany to fight Russia and everything else, I think those were huge pools of stuff that could have gotten far into exotic weaponry, the crossover between exotic occult concepts and stuff like that. I don't think we got the Vril team, or they disappeared on De Glock.
Well, there was no such thing as a Vril. The Vril and the Hanabu, that's all bullshit. We were saying that earlier. And the thing
wait,
that was
the Vril.
Whoa.
Even
The
Maria
Vril
was
flying saucer and the Hanabu are all bullshit.
That's fine, Walter. I thought you were saying there's no Vril. That you're right on the saucer.
The saucer stuff.
Sorry.
Well, how are you defining Vril? Are you defining
it's like a orgone energy, like energy that was used by these super long-haired women who were not the Thule, they were not the Black Sun, they were not.
Wait a minute, you meaning that Marina Orsic stuff?
Well, her group of women who were working with scientists, she came up with 400 pages of how to design the supposed Hanabu, whatever, in High German and Latin.
And L. Frank Baum came up with hundreds of pages of The Wizard of Oz.
After Blavatsky, because he was a theosophist. We did that.
And I get your point. I do get your point.
It's questionable. The whole Maria Orsic thing has been proven time and again to be very questionable.
Really?
But the thing with Operation Paperclip was what was driving it was not von Braun or even the atomic scientists. What was driving it were the aviation medicine scientists of the Luftwaffe and American aviation medicine scientists. It was putting man in space. And the reason von Braun, they wanted him twofold, was obviously for the weaponry they could use, but just as much because they thought, hey, he could build rockets that'll get us into space, which he ultimately did. But the real driving force was the goal to put man in space. That's what was really driving Operation Paperclip.
But I think there's a lot of mind control in there too. So like what we see.
Oh yeah, they got the MK Ultra guys. Yeah. I think they got
my
a
labs,
which was more important to them sometimes.
Sure.
My labs and the induction experiences, as well as aspects of the occult that may or may not be related to exotic
German
technologies.
occultists, yeah, definitely would have been were among those scientists. Absolutely.
Right. What is the number, Walter? To me, it's 150 to 300,000 high-ranking SS brought here and made comfy, and so either in Huntsville or
I don't think there were not SS. I don't think there were that many.
It's supposed to be like 30 to 50,000, including families, and then there's 300,000 German soldiers' families who were brought from the Druganovich Trail to South America, but not necessarily.
I know about
Paperclip.
A lot of spreading around in South America.
Well, when I think Strughold, Hubertus Strughold, no, not Strughold, but another guy off the top of my head, I'm not remembering his name, but when it was discovered by journalists in the United States and Canada, how deeply involved this particular guy had been involved in the heinous experimentation in Nazi Germany before and during the war, before we got a hold of him, the U.S. Air Force was embarrassed publicly. So here's what's interesting. They didn't hand this guy over to the authorities back in Germany. They escorted him on a plane and sent him to South America, where he was received by Germans there. This was the U.S. Air Force did this. So I find that, and that's in the actual, mainstream history of Operation Paperclip. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. It used to be, it was supposed to be that they would say, well, you're going back to Germany. We can't have you here. But they sent this guy to South America.
Colonia Dignidad.
Somewhere in Argentina, and then where he ended up after that, I don't know. So, what does that tell you? What arrangement did they have, or who did they know was down there that they handed this guy off to?
And Bariloche. The big, just to say really quickly, Hitler's supposed to have gone to Bariloche before going to San Bernardino, because Paraguay, it's easier because there's less socialist Italians than there are in Argentina. But when he got there to Argentina, he went to Bariloche. Today, Bariloche is where the Atomic Research Center is. So it's their own little mini linear accelerator in Argentina and connected to the hydroelectric power plant. So there's a lot of stuff around there. People have these stories in El Buzón of UFOs. That's the epicenter in Argentina for UFO stories.
Did anybody watch Hunting Hitler, a special forces operator, Green Beret guy? Can't think of his name.
I also swam that lake when I was in Bariloche to get to the island where his big concrete stone manor is supposed to be. But that's again one of the reasons why I was convinced he went to Paraguay, because there's a lot of evidence for getting him out into San Bernardino. San Bernardino today has got the most poisoned lake in all of South America. Like nothing can live in it. It's all.
I think Mengele and a lot of people like that kind of came in and out of this arrangement. They could have had another safe place, or they could have met here, or whatever. But nope. I thought I had another point.
Well, that's a good point you bring up. Under Alan Dulles' CIA in particular, I could totally see Mengele possibly, having come into the United States for
he was
whatever
MK
reason.
Ultra's Dr. Green. We had a few mysterious MK Ultra doctors, and when you look at the actual interactions with patients or survivors or whatever, there's certain doctors never had normal names, and Dr. Green, seen by so many people around the world or whatever, is supposedly Mengele. Like I said, I think he had a comfy spot, and then he still went out and did his own adventures. But I think a lot of what turned into aspects of MK Ultra, even the abduction phenomenon, uses Nazi exotic technology and their knowledge of mind control mixed with Ultra, or however they figured that out. Do you think that the Air Force, the 3705th Bomber Wing, or do you think anyone in the Air Force carries out my labs, Walter?
That's another thing I have.
Richard Doty directly said yes, but I was like, what?
Okay, let me tell you.
This is not a person I'm taking.
When I was an OSI agent in my first year, there was a special project that I was a counterintelligence guy, and I pitched what we call a development case, a development file, to my boss, and they said, yeah, you can do it and stuff. But I got a total cautionary tale briefing about Richard Doty, and hey, we want to avoid. It's like, this is Richard Doty. Don't be Richard Doty. And this was before he was, I had ever heard of him before. He was public. This was in 1994. Okay.
Wow.
And I was told, you want to avoid being this guy, Richard Doty, because he embarrassed the hell out of the Air Force. And that's what it was. He was used as a cautionary tale. I've only communicated personally with the guy once. It was a few years ago. It was over texting DMs, and it was a pleasant interaction. However, the problem I have is he and I used to do his specialty. While he was in, he had one particular specialty. That was my specialty when I was at Wright-Patterson. And that specialty involves, let's say, perception management and telling, things that aren't necessarily true for a purpose, for an agenda. And here's the thing. I personally find Richard Doty to be a narrative opportunist. Whatever keeps him relevant to the community, whatever keeps him speaking at conferences, whatever keeps him being interviewed on radio shows and whatever, Richard Doty will tell. Okay. He'll say what they want to hear.
Right.
But so therefore, I personally, because of all that, I generally don't buy Richard Doty's claims.
Well,
you've
forget
seen the body
that.
language,
Where
you've
do
seen
my
the
labs
speech
come
patterns, you've seen all that same stuff that I was looking at too, hey?
What?
And you can identify. You've seen the speech patterns, the body language. You've watched it closely and identified those same tells that I've watched when he's talked. Same thing with Corbell.
Yeah,
that guy.
Corbell to me is a carnival barker.
No
credibility whatsoever.
We're also about like 10 minutes late or to the end, so I want to ask a couple questions.
Sure, go ahead.
One someone asked was about whether you believe, and we kind of talked a bit about the underground military bases and breakaway civilization. Do you think that there is a breakaway civilization simultaneously existing somewhere isolated from us here?
Here's what I think about that, because I've changed. I used to use the phrase breakaway civilization, which it's an excellent concept. It's an excellent definition, and we owe Richard Dolan coming up with the definition, and that is a very good
Corey
definition.
Good tried to sue me for using it.
Oh God, Corey Good. I'm sorry that you had to go through that circus. Here's the thing. I think the word civilization is too big. It causes people to think of this breakaway. I say group. Faction would be another good word. And here's the thing: these breakaways, they coexist with us in this world. They just have access to, as Dolan defined, they have access to resources, both material and financial or whatever, to do kind of their own thing and have access to technologies that we, the common masses, don't have, and the ability to develop these things. So what it is it amounts to their existence is that much better than ours, and certain technologies they've developed may be asymmetric to the line we've followed. So
like Elysium.
Yeah, kind of, but on a much lesser scale. But
right.
So I think these breakaways exist. Absolutely, I think, and I think there's probably more than one of them, but it's not as far developed or as wild as people's imaginations like to think.
TR3B real or part of that, or just a conspiracy?
The TR3B?
Yeah,
then you're getting into possible. I've got no problem with the Aurora, the TR3B, something being a nugget of truth about that, because I mean you learn pretty quickly when you look at that stuff, particularly if you work around that world like I did. Look, whatever. For example, this is one example. Ours is not the only one who does this, but the U.S. Air Force. If the U.S. Air Force tells you aircraft A is our most advanced aircraft we have, you can bet money that that's not the truth. We have something you don't know about that's probably, at least in a practical application, 20 to 30 years ahead of what we're being told aircraft A could do. And here's another thing. You're told aircraft A has this ceiling and that speed. I guarantee you the ceiling's higher and the speed is faster, the capabilities. That's just common military sense, good sense. But also you can bet that there's something in being used in practical application that's going to be what you'd call 20 to 30 years advanced, that they're not telling you about. And again, that's also just good military sense.
Right.
Also, we've got this idea of, whether space is being faked and the moon's being faked, but also if it's coming back. Because if we're supposed to be able to have been there before, why are we not? When are we going back to space, in your opinion, if we're going at all, or whatever's happening?
Or are we already there currently?
We're already there currently. I'm convinced of that.
I think that whole discussion's a moot issue, because who says we ever really stopped? I just think they've always been doing the secret missions to space, and we haven't really stopped our manned presence in space. We claim that narrative to the public, but there's no legitimate reason to assume just because they told us that we haven't. My God, please, come on. Look what they told us about other things, that wasn't true. But yeah, I think we've been up there.
According to NASA, they lost all the technology, and it will be a, quote, very painful process to rebuild back up.
Yeah, right. Of course, that's NASA, right? Never a straight answer. But see, that's NASA doing a sleight of hand. Don't look behind the man behind the curtain. That's NASA telling you about them, allegedly them. NASA isn't speaking for whatever secret manned space program that the military has. And no, it's not like this advanced Starfleet crap that the jerk Corey Goode has claimed and lied about. It's something that is, for the most part,
really debunked in court. I have to.
Exactly. He debunked himself so he can go piss up a rope. But, a classified manned space program, I think, was mostly parallel to what we saw NASA doing in the early decades. But somewhere, my guess is somewhere around 1980, it really started pulling ahead and farther. But remember, it's not like we are using the shuttle, but there was really secretly a Starship Enterprise. That's ridiculous. It was just, if there's a classified program, which I think there has been, it's just a little bit more advanced than what we know about publicly.
Enough to the point where people with telescopes looking 24/7 across the globe distributed have not seen these things launching, showing up. So unless they develop poking technology before they develop advanced abilities, which I highly doubt,
you're wrong.
Making these things look similar to what we've already put up in space.
You're wrong. Here's the thing, okay? People would be seeing this all the time, like when they've launched stuff from Vandenberg for years. Tell me, has anyone in this room ever been privy to what's inside the classified payloads that get loaded on those rockets before they're launched? No.
Well, I'll sign up for the first to be privy to it if you want to disclose, but no, unfortunately, I don't think any of us have.
I don't think
that's right. Now, I'll tell you, I've been the closest because one of my bosses who I referred to, she was the OSI agent who was briefed in and assigned to be the OSI agent when these payload pods were escorted from their point of origin to Vandenberg or back. So here's the thing, who are we to say that that the payload couldn't have had a live crew aboard? And people say, oh, but the telemetry signal, it would have revealed it. Oh, come on. If you don't think they found a way to shroud all that, come on, you're being naive. I'm not saying you, Exotic. I'm speaking the rhetorical you, us.
No, relevant though, relevant.
But here's the thing: we could have been putting people in space right under the noses of the public,
disguising it for years.
Classified, disguised, and I always get the guy that says, "Well, my Uncle Steve was a security troop at Vandenberg." Well, I'm sorry, but Tech Sergeant Uncle Steve was not briefed in on what was on board that rocket. Sorry, So it's from my perspective, with my experience around that world, that's the possibility that I suggest it be considered. So it would have been a lot easier. It's a lot easier to have put people up in space secretly than people think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's just take a look at some of the rockets that have these arrow spikes on the front, right? They have these towers.
I can only hear one at a time.
Right.
For the love of God. All right. Not Data and Star Trek.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, like Diego Garcia as a location or Antarctica as launch locations as well for secret space. It's the perfect spots that.
There you go.
A lot easier to hide.
There you go. I mean,
Antarctica's got a lot to hide.
No one's gonna see it.
Yeah.
So
East LA's got a lot to hide. Downtown, I bet you that there's some space programs.
Hey, what about? And we don't know the imagine there could be some technology that some type of launch vehicle could be launched from a nuclear submarine that surfaces out in the middle of the Pacific.
That's what I
South
tend to imagine.
Pacific,
Yeah.
you know, and you know, you have to
ICBMs
all
that
these
they're
things.
already launching out of those things pretty much go into space as it is. So
Yeah, so it's these kinds of things are possible, and I find them potentially just as fascinating, you know, as some of the wild stuff that's not likely true that people come up with, but it's not as fun, you know, as the wild stuff. So
We were
we
watching
understand the
Tesla
possibility
building
that
SpaceX.
very advanced
Whoa.
forms of technology, you know, those of electrodynamics and space-time modification and refractive index control, were actually discovered quite a while ago. Then we automatically have to accept the idea that these craft wouldn't be easily visible from certain angles, and that they could basically be self-cloaked by very mechanism of their operation of their flight.
Yeah.
And so that stuff is entirely possible. I mean, going back, you know, to the 1800s, some of these strange events have been observed and reported.
Yeah, exactly.
And so do we really think that it was just dropped, forgotten about completely? I mean, why did this stuff pop up and then completely disappear? Even archive.org has been forced to delete or completely remove any traceability of certain things that they had posted. They should have never been online, apparently.
Well, two things real quick. Number one, in defense of Frank bringing up the Vril stuff, I mean, it could simply be that the people talking about the Vril energy, it was actually something very real, that they were just calling it something else. You know, they were on to something that was real, but they just, you know, didn't know how to describe it in terms we would today scientifically. The other thing is, remember, anti-gravity research was something that was open source. It was in popular in science and stuff like that. But somewhere around 1958, many people think there was a breakthrough because suddenly that stuff disappeared from open sources.
Right,
and
exactly. I want to point this out too,
yeah.
since we're just, you know, crossing over the 2-hour mark. You know, the idea, the whole Vril thing might just be a conspiracy. You could say it's misdirection, but here's what I've found.
Yeah.
As an experimenter, engineer, and researcher, what I found is that research into the Vril has brought me through searches to viable, testable technology that I can replicate here in the lab. So whether or not the entire story as it's portrayed is there historically accurate, even if it's completely false, not the kind of thing you tell your friends. But if you want to take it to the lab and test it, electrodynamics is a highly viable technology that has been entirely under-investigated, and it operates by a mechanism not recognized in today's physics. Even in quantum electrodynamics, we have a serious problem where all of the variables that would generally go to infinities in their system or in their calculations have been gauged out. And so with this gauge factor, we remove the ability for electromagnetic systems that synthesize magnetic or electric fields to produce a change in the refractive index. If we accept that every single magnet or every single transmitter, every electric or magnetic field produces a fundamental change in the permittivity and permeability of that space-time, now we have a mechanism to modify that very fabric of space which we all exist in. And we have a propulsion technology which could have easily been investigated, what I verified personally in my lab and I'm continuing to develop and investigate, that, of course, you know, many before have discovered for a very long time, and it's been known since Maxwell. Even Maxwell had the system of quaternions to consider the variable refractive index. Heaviside and Gibbs recalculated it to remove those variables because they were too complicated for the mathematicians of the time to implement the power grid for the United States, which is why we lost.
Well, remember the sleight of hand they did with physics. We were forced onto the Einstein track. And everything has to follow Einstein. My friend, Dr. Joseph Farrell, points this out all the time. The other very viable, in some opinions, more likely truths of physics were just publicly, nope, that can't be because Einstein was used, you know, to divert our attention off of what some people were really doing. And you know, I applaud what you're saying. You're right. Take it to the lab. It doesn't matter what the crazy story about the naked ladies in the circle with the long blonde hair. If the nugget of truth of this Vril thing that we're talking about is something that is real, then that's what counts. Right?
Yep, we don't care about the story. I'm fully willing to dump all that stuff.
Yeah, right.
Grinder, as long as it equals a testable technology that we can do something with. That's
I'm glad Exotic said all that.
Literally any story, no matter how extreme, no matter how crazy, from anybody at all, regardless of their evidence, regardless of their history, just to get that little tidbit that morsel of technology that I can stick on my lab bench.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's what I say about all the kind
kernel
of
of truth
stuff we do. Yeah, where we're looking into this weird stuff. So,
guys,
I'm
make sure you
glad
also
that-
go to. I was going to say, make sure you go to Walter Bosley's YouTube channel and subscribe, because he has some underviewed videos that you definitely need to see. I mean, these are incredible. And
agreed.
Let's
also,
another link for that. I am going to subscribe.
I will do that
to it
too.
for
But
sure
guess
after
what?
this
If you
interview.
haven't figured out, you can go to also Walter Bosley.
For everybody.
Let me just say also, you can go to walterbosley.com, because that's the best way to get his books. I mean, you can find them on Amazon, but do they?
And also lostcontentlibrary.com. That's that and walterbosley.com definitely. Yeah.
Sweet.
Right. And so you can wait, lost. I spelled it wrong. What did I do here?
One super chat before it all starts. What does Walter think of Giant of Kandahar story?
You know, I personally, I would love for that to be true. I lean towards it's not, but I'm always open to hearing, because I still have a lot of fun with this stuff. I mean, come on, it's fun. And you just heard me say, don't throw babies out with the bathwater. You know, I always ask myself, what's the nugget of truth to this story about the Giant of Kandahar? You know, I don't just dismiss everything. And that one is intriguing. That's a lot of fun.
And it's been
Maybe
changing
they found
on the
a
internet.
red one or something, and that could be the truth. And sorry, I just wanted to point out one quick thing. The Buran did complete one uncrewed space flight in 19.
Oh, it did.
In
Oh, wow. Okay.
Uncrewed space flight that it completed safely. So it would have been drone remote controlled in 88, and then
okay, so half of my understanding was true. It was definitely a design ripoff of ours, but the fact is they did put it up there in space. Okay. Okay.
All I was going to say real quick was I was glad Exotic said all that and even said take it to the lab and the bench and test it out for that.
That's
truth.
right. That's right.
On my
Absolutely.
side, intellectually, just reading everything, I came to the conclusion that that's where that would definitely be the outer world. The inner world, if we're just to understand concepts, is it somewhere between Orgon and Chi? Like it's invocable and buildable in the body in some way that would work the way that those martial arts that are dependent on Chi and not just using it as part of the striking process or whatever works. But then I saw so many psychosexual, psychedelic kind of crossovers in the explanation. It also seemed to be like Orgon, because it is testable in the lab. It is a science thing. I think that yes, sir.
I was just going to say on that issue, that reminds me of check out Joseph Farrell's work on the atomic bomb explosions and at Trinity site, the tests where there seemed to be an extra burst of energy that was more than the sum of its parts. In other words, the atomic explosion seemed to trigger an effect that triggered an extra energy or power. Joseph can describe it better than I am, but it could be that when you're talking about the Chi and the Orgon and then the Vril, it could be kind of in that vein of there's something out there that's more than just the sum of the parts.
Right.
Yeah, the one warning, the piece of advice I would give to listening to wild stories is anybody who has advice or information to offer you, regardless of whether or not it seems believable, listen to it and consider it. If you can model things in your own mind, which I should say is a requirement for any investigator, model their story in your own mind as if it was completely true. Consider that they might not be remembering it correctly. Maybe they're not even deceiving you. Maybe they are. But look for those tidbits of consistent information which align with things that you previously learned and seem to form a bigger picture. If you can pull those pieces out, take all of what you can, because even people who are sent to mess you up, throw you off your course, have generally information which they'll accidentally speak about to give you enough so that it's a partial truth. And if you've got the discernment, consider it as possible in your mind for that moment, but don't let it affect your perception of reality after you leave that conversation. And that's my warning. Do not adopt that into your total perception of the world until you actually test it or have some proof. But consider it possible in the moment where you have access to that information or while you're being told that story. It's the only way you're going to get any kind of viable information out of these extreme sources. And we've got to be really, really stringent with our investigation. Not overly skeptical. Doesn't matter how you perceive outside in that moment, but you've got to remember that there is a consistent reality which aligns with many other experiments, many other perceptions that you'll have by that point. And if you can link it in and it all makes sense consistently, you've got a picture that you can do something with.
Yeah.
All right, we got one last question here. Bosley, any thoughts on Burkhardt-Heim's theory?
I'm not familiar with it.
Neither am I. Sorry, I'm sorry. Compliziert. Oh God, I butchered that. But
Compliziert.
I was messaging with Joseph Giza Death Star community in your live chat there, and he was down for coming on to another one of these with us. We'll aim
Excellent.
for 2 weeks' time, so I'll be in contact with you, Walter, and if you can email Joseph, and I'd love to really get into his alchemy of free energy and so many more of the over unity physics and amazing research that both Joseph and you have gone into over the years.
Yeah, and everybody check out Walter's books, but don't fail to check out Joseph Farrell's, all of his books, and then Peter Levenda. And even Jim Mars is part of this triad that I thought were the most important people last couple of decades, really getting the kernels of truth, the most genuinely out or collected in one book. Then I've seen, I would have to read 11 other authors to get the wrong idea about Nazis in Antarctica. And then I look into their stuff, and it's Walter Bosley and Peter Levenda will have you reconceiving the way you look at the world and the way you understand systems and organizations and stuff like that. Joseph Farrell has so much. It seems like he has 9 lives. There's so much technical information in there, and then he'll completely switch topics, and then he'll go back. Actually, let me do a 7th book on paperclip and mind control, or just whatever. He's like the legitimate. I don't want to compare him to David Childress, but because that's more anthropology and archaeology. But he's like a hyper legitimate.
But I know he's watching. But I'm gonna give you a little tidbit that you can just put in your back pocket. As diverse as you see Joseph Farrell's works, he does have, it's coming from an overarching hypothesis.
Oh, I can tell, yeah. Especially the way he references his other stuff.
Yeah,
as you get further into it,
Yeah, and which
really
even
cool.
I am anxious for him to finally get to, and because as long as I've known him and we've had private talks and stuff, and I get a little bit of insight, it took me, I think, like 4 years to understand what he calls the metaphor. He's probably laughing right now, and I still am not a master of it. It took me 4 years just to grasp, the basic concept. So yeah,
and Peter Levenda is really great. I had the most polite falling out with him with his decision to go forward with the TTSA. There's actually an interview where for an hour and a half I'm just stoning him with so why you?
Why, Peter?
And then I'd re-explain to him how significant he was already, and then why teaming up with Blink-182 would solve anything. But and that still looks like an embarrassment to me. But he's one of my favorite authors for the past decades, outside of comic books. And I don't know, I highly recommend Levenda's stuff. Maybe not post TTSA, because even the books that he wrote with TTSA, I did not find moving beyond a Ancient Aliens episode.
I think that was a gig for him.
Sure.
A well enough paying gig, and he had to stick within their narrative. In his defense, I also think Tom DeLonge was used, by perception management operations guys. But that's another.
They were
discussion.
asking for thousands and thousands of dollars to build a spaceship, and they were releasing children's books and all sorts of things, pencils and backpacks before they did anything legitimate.
In general,
I'm sorry, man. What's that?
Anything like cultish and releasing children's books, not a good combo in general, usually, right?
Well, especially if you're saying you're going to bring out the big truth we've all been waiting for, but you're going, wait, first, help us crowdfund a spaceship. We need to just build one.
Exactly.
That's the first goal of you learning what you've seeked all these years in the answers and esotericism and ufology and etc. And Peter Levenda covers a lot of esotericism and well.
Yes, he does indeed. So, Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on in this
Thank you
discussion.
so much, Walter. It was amazing, and yeah, I'll be in touch, and we'll make sure to do this again in 2 weeks' time, and include the amazing Joseph P. Farrell, and just
That'd be awesome.
bringing these minds together. It's been an honor. It's awesome, and thank you for all you've done, good sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Walter.
I forgot to bring up the hitchhiker effect, but we'll do that one on the next one.
We'll do that next one, yeah.
That's a whole other hour. So
okay, cool.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Much
all right.
Peace, everybody.